Hello and welcome, everyone. This is the Conversation Room, and I am your host, Ellen Wagner. We are super curious from where you're tuning in, so please use the chat. This is the way that you can interact with us today in this next hour, where we're going to talk about international schools and inclusion. And we're not going to do this. I'm not going to do this alone. I have two wonderful guests by my side, which I'm going to introduce in just a second. So we would love to ask you to use the chat. You can share from where you're tuning in. If you have any kind of questions, just put them in the chat and we try to answer them. I know 1 hour is not enough time. I just remember when I met Cath and April for a dry run here to check everything. We could just go on forever talking about this topic because both of them just have a huge expertise in this topic, and they both can go on forever. And I really enjoy this
in the nicest possible way.
Of course. Well, you can judge for yourself. So yes, just please use the chat. Post your questions in there, and we will be happy to try to answer them. Okay. So we already got a first comment by a LinkedIn user. April had a idea who it might be.
Yeah, I wonder if that's Nicole, but I think we'll find out, won't we?
Yeah, Nicole, if it's you, because we only see LinkedIn user, I'm curious about your view and input on how best to address and have the conversation about diverse needs and different educational pathways with parents. Yeah, this is what we're going to talk about. And there's also Meg from the beautiful shores of Lake Superior in, okay, can I say that right?
Duluth. It's right north of where I'm from in Iowa. So,
oh, wow. That is exciting. I get a little geography lesson here. We have Nicole from Tallink Megastar en route to Helsinki.
Yeah, she's on a boat.
Hey, moi. Wow, that is amazing. We also have another LinkedIn user from beautiful Berlin. And yeah, very exciting topic and so relevant. Thank you so much. So I see it is working. The interaction with the chat, that is great. But who am I and why are we here? So my name is Ellen Wagner. I go with the pronouns she, her. I'm currently located in the wonderful Princeton, New Jersey, which is at the east coast of the US. And as you might hear, I'm born and raised German. I live in the United States since 3 years. And since then, I am supporting organizations in Europe and in the US becoming more inclusive. Yeah, that's my topic. And we have some more people coming in. Hello, I'm Helle. Okay,
hi,
that was
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
one LinkedIn user. This is my wife. Kirsten is there from Skillman, New Jersey. Aren't you supposed to work right now? But that's okay. And we have another LinkedIn user following from Berlin. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for tuning in. So I told you already, I'm not alone here. And because you can introduce yourself way better than I could ever do, please go ahead, Cath. Just quickly introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Cath Brew. I'm an Australian and I live in the south of England on a tiny little island called Portland. And I live here with my wife, Ange. And I run Drawn to a Story, which is a company that celebrates diversity. So I'm an artist, as you can see behind me, and I illustrate and educate about marginalized experiences of positive change with a particular interest in identity, belonging, and LGBTIQ+ inclusion. And I work with all kinds of people, but primarily have a passion about international schools because I want to help get it right so kids grow up happy and healthy. So
thank you. Thank you for your introduction, Cath. April, would you like to go next?
Yeah, happy to. Please try to ignore this droopy face here. I just had Novocaine and so it's wearing off, but I feel really funny. So hopefully you don't see how funny I actually feel. I'm April Remfrey. I'm from Iowa, as we just established, in the middle of the U.S., a town of 2,000 people, and now live just outside of Zurich, Switzerland. We've been here for the last 9.5 years. I have two hats. The first one, I'm the CEO of my own company, Remfrey Educational Consulting, where I advocate for parents as they navigate the system for their neurodivergent child. And I also support schools as they work to up their inclusion game. The other hat I wear is I'm the COO for STEPS Community, and we support schools, businesses, and social enterprises to help build bridges to employment for the neurodivergent. And we help create paths for all students to be welcomed in international schools. And our biggest project most recently is creating disability inclusive standards so international schools can build to being consistent in the standards that they, or the services that they offer.
That's great. Okay, where to start? Maybe I can start and tell the audience a little bit about why we're here and how we came together. We're such diverse people here with different backgrounds, but I think one vision unites us all, that we live and work for more equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we all do this in a different way and maybe with a different focus. And I think Sarah Black recommended April, right? And I know Sarah from Families in Global Transition. So everybody out there who's also maybe a global nomad, traveling around the world, Families in Global Transition, short ad, is a really nice organization where you can find a home away from home. And after talking to April, I knew, okay, that was supposed to be just a nice networking chat. And I was asking her, would you like to do a conversation room with me? And April, yes. And would you know anyone who could join us for this topic? And she said, yes, I know someone, and that's Cath.
It wasn't me. I was last choice.
No. So I also had a conversation with Cath, and you immediately said, yes, that you're going to be on board. And I'm so glad that you're both here. Thank you so much for joining. And maybe for the people out there who are wondering, okay, not everybody is wondering, but maybe people are wondering, why do we need to talk about inclusion at schools? Aren't schools already inclusive? And what is the matter with international schools? Can you elaborate a little bit on that? April, would you like to go first?
Yeah, happy to. I think, international schools are a very literally foreign concept to a lot of us that grew up probably in public schools in our home country. So international schools are really enclaves of typically English-speaking schooling going on in all over the world. Right now, there are nearly 13,000 international schools that serve over 6 million students. And those students are ones that are consistently moving every 2, 3, 4 years. So they have a much different mandate than a typical school. We're talking about, we use the word transitions for when those students are leaving and moving to new schools, and even the transitions for those kids that are staying. We call them the stayers. So one of the biggest issues I see in international schools, from my perspective as someone that's been in disability inclusion work for over 25 years, is there's a lack of consistency across the international schools. And there's some schools that are guiding lights and are stars in the sky, but there are a lot of schools that are doing it on their own and figuring it out as they go. And I think one of the most important things is to start to bring some consistency, because curriculum that all students are taught, those are standardized. We have British curriculum, American curriculum, French, IB, but we don't have any standards, especially for students that have additional learning needs. And I find that a huge issue that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, April. Cath?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's kind of quite different. Basically, for LGBTQ plus kids, inclusion saves lives. It's that I don't want to be too blunt, but it can be that blunt. And when we look at statistics, trans kids are more likely to think about or attempt to commit suicide than cisgender kids. So kids who are living the gender that they were born, and the kind of binary male female. So it's a really, really serious thing that is incredibly important for student well-being. And the reason that I'm particularly interested in doing it from an international school perspective is that if you're living in, say, a European country that has all the rights for LGBTQ plus people, that's wonderful. You still might get issues, but it's pretty much, it's much better than, say, if you're in a country where actually being gay is illegal or you can be killed. Or so there's a lot of layers of cultural, should we say, family cultures, religious cultures, country cultures, all of this kind of stuff, so that it means that being an LGBTQ plus kid in an international school can be incredibly complex. So you might be okay in the school, but when you go home, your parents don't necessarily agree with who you are because of their cultural beliefs. And there's a lot of complexity in teachers trying to support students in an environment where the home life might not be safe. The country within which the school is actually in may be illegal in that country. How do you deal with kids who are coming out to you or treating you as the safe adult? How do you do these things in those environments? So it really is about saving lives and wellness and helping kids achieve and be happy and healthy. Not just about school. It's all the layers of mental and physical overall well-being, essentially.
If you don't mind me piggybacking on that a little bit, that this is also an issue in the disability community, Cath, because right, what you're saying, it's culturally different in many different locations, and a lot of countries have the idea of karma, and that families are being punished for something that they've done in their past life by having a child with a disability. So a lot of times what happens is there's the idea that these children, these students, these people that are going to become adults in our society should not be educated. And they shouldn't be educated to the same level. They should be very happy just to be. And that's a really difficult stereotype and belief to break. So it overlaps quite a bit. And the other thing that overlaps too is people with autism have a much higher percentage, a higher rate of being LGBTQ in the community, right?
Yep, very true. Yeah, it's a big correlation. And I've got some books with me, and one of the ones I didn't bring down, but I've got one of all about exactly that, about being neurodivergent and being queer, as we say. It's a big thing, and so you often get that intersectionality of kids who are dealing with those two issues, and then there may be cultural issues and religion. Like, it's all these other layers, and it's hard enough being a kid, let alone being a third culture kid, let alone all these other extra layers of things on top. And so also what I'm really passionate about is doing this work for all the kids that aren't queer, the kids that are going to be the allies that want to support their friends and stand up for them and help them, and understanding all these things just makes for better adult human beings, as far as I'm concerned. So
I think
and hence this is the moment. I'm not going to flash my boobs to everyone, but this is my t-shirt of let's all be outstanding. It's
I love it.
Incredibly important that we're all doing this, not just me, not just allies, but everybody's working together.
Could I buy this shirt?
You could, if you'd like to. It's not officially in my shop yet. It is a one-off that I wear when I do trainings, but it will be.
I hope so. I hope so.
I have got stickers in the shop, though, that have this on it that you can buy. But
I love it. Yeah. Okay, we will recommend that.
And it's on your postcard that I send to everybody. I have a postcard that she's made with all these great sayings that I send out.
Yeah, we're gonna post the link to your shop in the chat later on. And we've been already talking about intersectionality. I mean, there've been many terms that people might not be able to follow because they heard them for the first time. So
Mhm.
maybe we are a little bit mindful of those people and don't send them to Google right away. But as we're here and we're experts, April, can you maybe tell the people a little bit about neurodiversity, which
Sure.
is an umbrella term, and what it stands for? And then, Cath, maybe you can go on with the umbrella term LGBTQI,
Yep.
sexual orientation and gender identity. That would be awesome.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, happy to. So neurodivergence is a blanket term for a group of people that have that we're talking about brain functionality when we're talking about neurodivergence. The opposite of that is neurotypical, what people tend to think of as normal, which we're getting away from trying to use that word, right? Because everyone's brain works in a different way. But a neurodivergence is what we assume and we say now falls outside of the typical way we expect a brain to function. But this can relate to not just the way people learn, but also mental health. When we're talking about depression and anxiety, that can be a neurodivergence as well. When I say neurodivergent, that's referring to one individual. Neurodivergence is a group of people. So it's new language that the community themselves are asking us to use. And that's one of my, something that I'm really passionate about, is making sure that we're using the language that the community is asking us to use. And it's simply a matter of staying educated and listening to the community. So Cath, I'll let you go with
Yeah,
your.
I couldn't agree with you more in terms of LGBTQ plus stuff as well. So LGBTQ plus is an acronym that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, or transgender, queer. And then there's the plus. Now, it depends on which country you're in. Some countries will have IA at the end, others just have plus. There's all these variations. But the IA can be intersex, and then the A is also sometimes ally or asexual. The Q, sorry, can also be questioning. Like, there's this huge range. So I tend to just stick with the LGBTQ plus, and then the plus allows for every other gender expression or sexual orientation or identity that does not fit the binary. And when I say the binary, I mean the heteronormative, the heterosexual, cisgendered, male, female idea of what it means to be a human. And one of the things that people get very, very confused about. Sorry, I was looking at my camera, not at you, April. I just saw hands moving.
I'm happy to represent that here if you ladies can take your roles.
That's good. For once, you're in the minority. That's yay!
It's great. I love it.
But one thing I wanted to be very clear in this conversation is that people get confused about the difference between sex and gender. So sex is the biological sex that you were assigned at birth, which is basically a doctor looks down, looks at genitalia, and decides whether you're male or female. This also is a problem because it doesn't allow for intersex people often in those moments, and you will get if that is obvious, then they'll often do surgery that aligns with the sex that they deem is the most appropriate or the most obvious. The problem with that is that a lot of intersex people now are talking about that being an abuse and actually saying that we should allow them to just live as they are, and then they can choose later on in life what they want to do. So that's sex, the literally biological sex on genitalia. Gender is actually pretty much a cultural, social construct. Every society has different ideas of what gender is. So in my society, say in the UK, it used to be being feminine meant that you had long hair and you wore dresses, and men had beards and wore hats, and it could be that kind of level. But now men can have long hair, women wear jeans, trousers. Like, so gender actually isn't a tangible thing. It's a social construct, and then how you feel about yourself, what your own gender is your gender identity, and then how you express that to the world, whether that's through your clothing, through accessories, the way you speak, the way you gesticulate, that is then your gender expression. So it's an awful lot of terms. And I have to say that probably about 2 years ago, I thought, oh, I don't know any of this. And I had to really get my head around all these words. Like April said, there's all these new words, these new things coming in. If you go onto my website at drawntostory.com, under work with Cath, I've got LGBTIQ+ resources, and there's a download that's terminology. So you can actually download and work out what some of these terms are, because it can all get quite confusing. But like April said, the most important thing is to be using the words that the community is expressing that they want to be used. And that, can I just say one extra thing on that, is one of the things I see a lot is people don't know how to address someone. So you'll notice at the beginning of this that Ellen said, I use the pronouns she/her. It's a very good way to start to get into that practice of doing that yourself, because then you know where you're at, what language someone wants to use. And if you don't know, just ask them. Just say, how would you like me to address you? And let them tell you, or mirror their language. So if someone refers to their wife, refer to the wife. Or if they say my partner, say my partner. One of the biggest things that I get often is that I will say, because I don't quite know what reaction I'm going to get, I'll say, on my other half does this. People always automatically assume it's a man, which then puts me in a difficult position of, do I let them know? So mirror people's own language, and just ask them, how do I address you? The same way you'd say, what's your name? What pronouns would you like me to use? It's really simple. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yes, and I think this is where the challenge starts for the schools already, right? There are a lot of terms, language is evolving, and sometimes it's hard to catch up, right? And to also focus on intersectionality. Like we said before, we are humans and we are not just one identity, or we don't only have one part of identity, which might be the ethnicity or the cultural background, but there's so much more. And sometimes schools or organizations are only focusing on one thing, that might be the gender, and they think this is good for girls, but there are girls with different backgrounds and girls who have different needs. And April, maybe you could talk about what you see one of the biggest learning support issues in international schools.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for the question. Yeah, like I said before, I think it's really lack of consistency. And we think of students as being the ones that are transient, that are making all the transitions, but it's also teachers. Teachers in international schools tend to have a 2-year contract, and then they might re-up for another 2 years, but frequently they're moving on to another school. And what happens when there are not standards in the learning support world of international schools is that programs then become attached to people instead of programs being attached to a school and the ethos and the vision of the school. So one of the things that I really support happening in schools is that when schools are making their strategic plan for the next 5 years, they include learning support vision in that strategic plan. And like I said before, and Nicole asked this question too about those standards that we're making and Cath and I have been talking about this too, the idea of standards for LGBTQ plus practices in international schools as well, is that the reason for those standards are to create a roadmap for schools towards working towards best practices. We're not expecting overnight for everything to change. We understand that there's going to need to be a buildup, and it's a mountain to climb. But I think people are willing to do it. But having a roadmap and saying, this is the gold standard, and here's the way that you could make your steps towards it, and putting it in the strategic plan, I think it would be a huge step forward for international schools.
And can you talk a little bit more about STEP? We also had a question in the beginning.
Sure.
Around that.
Yeah. STEP is my first hat, right? STEP is strategic tracking of educational progress. And this came out of my frustration of being a teacher for 20 years. Just this, we know that best practice says that you track students' progress over time to be able to see where they're making developments, where they're not. And then you can make little tweaks quickly. It's not waiting till the end of a semester to get a grade and go, uh-oh, that didn't go well, right? So it's checking little dipstick tests. You know how when you used to check your own oil and you put that in there and you see how much is left on the stick? It's the same as a program that's lives on the cloud that I've put in about 5,000 different goals and objectives for teachers to use, because sometimes it's hard to come up with these goals, and then be able to track student progress very quickly, very easily, and see a graph of that slow progress moving up the chart. One of the worst things as a teacher is to go into a parent meeting and say, well, I think Ellen's making progress in her reading, and not having any proof that that's really happening. So it's taking the guesswork out of it. And so STEP is one of those things that came out of frustration, but I think a lot of things get created that way. So we have a few schools that are starting to use it, and I'm excited for more schools to take it on board.
And what can schools do, or maybe parents who are watching now who are interested in that?
Yeah, I think this is really a tool for schools to use, but I think it always helps when parents say, you know, I wish there was a way that you could track progress better. And all of us that are trained in learning support, we all know it's been said for 50 years that we should be tracking progress. It's just the logistics of getting it done are difficult. So if you have a way you can do that, that's on your phone as you're walking around, or on an iPad, or on any kind of tablet, it just makes your life a lot easier. I used to carry around these big, huge binders for students and make tick marks all the time. Are they making progress? Yes or no? And by October, you're like, I can't do this anymore. So that's really where this came from. So yeah, thank you. If you go to my website, I'd be happy to talk to anybody. If you can set up an appointment, we can talk about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, April. And we had a question coming in from Meg, and Cath, I think you also wanted to share some resources around books.
Yeah, it was just Meg had asked. Yeah, sure. Meg had asked, were there any books I could recommend for unlearning kind of the binary world? There's this book in particular is called Gender: A Graphic Guide. It's by Meg John Barker and Jules Shelley. It's a very good book because it basically it's a graphic book, but it talks all about female privilege, male privilege, the binary, what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine, where the binaries came from, why they still exist today, and it's a really good book. The same authors have also done a book called Queer: A Graphic History, and this also has kind of people coming out, people in history who've been gay, kind of the wealth excuse me, the wealth of heterosexuality in the world, and just like there's some really good books, and they're quite good because they're graphic, and they're much easier to take in from that regard. But by all means, if you want any more, please do send me anything, any questions or anything, and I can guide people in the right direction. As I can see, Ellen said the gender unicorn is also particularly good because that helps people understand the difference between sex, sexuality, sexual attraction, all of that kind of, all these words. But it's a very, very good resource. There was another question.
Yes, and I just quickly read it from Meg. Is it more respectful or less to use she, they versus she, her? I'm seeing more people using she, they or he, they, and I like that it challenges people to think in a non-binary or gender fluid way. Yeah.
What I would say to that is it very much depends on what the person actually wants you to call them. I mean, I'm a lesbian, but I still go by she, her. The they tends to be for people who are more non-binary or transgender, who don't fit that binary somehow. So my wife refers to themselves as they. What I would say is that what you often will get is people use she, they, or he, they. If there's a few things, some people will jump about depending on how they feel that day, whether they're feeling like they're kind of more masculine or more feminine, the way, whatever way they want to express that day. Other people will put she, they just to show that that either is fine, like it doesn't matter. But I wouldn't go just assume, you never assume that what someone's pronoun is. Actually ask them and then use what they tell you. Because if someone called me they, it really wouldn't be right. It'd be quite uncomfortable. Equally, calling someone who uses they, you calling them she or he might not go down very well. What I also would like to say is particularly in an international school context, a lot of people question the usage of they as a singular, because everybody seems to know it as a plural, and it's like, oh, I can't use that. It's just wrong. And actually, what I would say to you is, do you realize that the Oxford Dictionary can actually trace back to 1375 the singular use of they? We use it all the time. You'll be in a restaurant, you look over another table. Can I have what they're having? What are they eating? Or can that person come over here? I really like them. We use it all the time. And what I would say is, if you still then have any resistance, is imagine what it's like me calling you the wrong pronoun all day, every day. It's really uncomfortable. It's not a nice thing. So actually, in terms of inclusion and just common respect and decency, it's not hard just to call someone what they ask you to call them, in the same way that you use their name. To me, it's a sign of respect. For the person who's doing it, it's a very small thing. For the person who needs to hear it, it's a massive thing of being accepted and seen. And I've heard people talk about it being physically painful, like physically uncomfortable to be called the wrong pronoun. So I would always just ask someone what they are, and then if they haven't referred to you, if they haven't said he or she, then I would use they in the sense of, you don't know, it's like as though you don't know who you're talking to. Just use it as a generic, gender neutral kind of thing. But generally I would ask someone and say how they be referred to.
And you can also just refer to the name. So
just use their name.
When I had my first team member being trans non-binary, I really struggled with this concept, although I'm teaching around this topic, LGBTQI+. And the very easy thing is just to say Cath says and April says. So there is no misgendering. And there are also studies showing that suicide rates can go down just by using pronouns. Just what you said before, Cath, it saves life, and it costs you almost nothing, just 30 seconds to put it in your email signature, or to put it on your LinkedIn profile. And while we're talking about language, April, in the disability community, I learned that there's a difference between people first language and identity first. Could you explain what the difference is?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot in the last 10 years or so. It used to be that it was the people would say something. I'm going to use Down syndrome as an example. The Downs kid. That was very common to be heard 20 years ago. And then we realized that, and I'm including myself in this, right? Because it was a learning process, that people first language was more important. So that's a human being, right? When you're referring to them as their disability only, that's harmful and that's hurtful. So it turned into the boy with Down syndrome, or even better, John, right? Unless it had something to do with the situation, there was no reason to say what his disability was in that moment. And now we're learning that, and again, it's the same thing about asking what somebody wants. What does the community want? And not only just the community, what does that individual want? Because there's a lot of conversation going on within the disability community, because some people want identity first. They want to be the autistic individual. Other people would prefer to be the individual with autism. So again, it always goes back to being a good human being and saying, how would you like me to refer to you? I would prefer that people ask me that too. I don't like being called Nora's mom, right? My name's April, right? But when my daughter comes home and says, I think right now I would prefer she, they, who am I to question that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not for me to say. So again, it's all in the same principle, all in the same theory. What does the community prefer? What does the community want? And ask, be respectful.
And can I just tack on to that in terms of identity, that one thing within the LGBTQ plus community is people would often, well, allies outside it would say, oh, do you identify as trans? And actually, in saying that, it implies that there's another option possible, and it's not the case. So you now are finding that there's a more of a push just to say, are you trans? Or I am trans, I am something, I don't identify as, because then it separates me from that identity somehow. And actually, I don't say I identify as a woman. Like, to me, as a cisgendered woman, that just feels really odd. I just wouldn't say that. I just say I am a woman. So why do we not afford the same acknowledgement and actually respect of someone knows who they are and how they need to be addressed? So it comes down to respect and asking people and saying the right thing.
Meg just made a really great comment about there is nothing efficient about establishing a relationship, and I can't agree with that more. Right? It's this is something you have to take care and just be honest and ask the questions, because when you get a little bit further down the road, it feels uncomfortable. But always ask, no matter what part or time in the relationship it is, if you have a question.
And also, I try to get in here, and I think it's really important to go first. Okay, so if you want to know about somebody else and ask a personal question, go first. And strip down first. Say something like, hi, I'm Ellen. I'm a cisgender woman. May I ask you what you are, right? And that makes a complete different atmosphere, right? It's not me versus them and the other, because I am normal and you are probably not, and I just want to find out why. So I think,
and if you're in a business meeting, this is probably not something that has anything to do with your work, right? So it needs to fit the context as well.
But you say that, April, but at the same time, this is where LGBTQ plus people are put in a sticky situation. I can be in a business meeting, and because I don't know what the room's doing, feeling or thinking, I can just say, oh yes, my partner says that, or you just do some generic thing. It's part of the conversation. The room then assumes that that person is male. Do I correct that person because, this is a work meeting, it doesn't really matter? But if I don't correct them, do I feel like I'm lying to myself? I'm not hiding. I don't want to hide. So then I'll say something. And then it's often the heterosexual cisgendered people that will say, might think afterwards, oh, well, why are you bringing in your sexuality into the meeting? Well, actually, you made me, by your, I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but by your assumption, you've made me, put me in a difficult conversation, and this is position. So this is why it's really important never to assume, because it's like microaggression. You end up in this state of permanently having to defend yourself and out yourself all the time, every single day, multiple times a day. And if you step in first and take some responsibility for that and say, this is who I am, it's like, oh, I can have a conversation now. I'm not in a defensive space. So
thank you for that. I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah.
Cath, what do you reply to parents who are concerned because kids have to be confronted with a sexual orientation at school? This is sometimes something that I hear in the context of schools. Similar to the working context, right?
Yeah.
Why you have to talk about sexual orientation or gender identity?
What I would say is that the kids are all talking about it anyway. So let's make it like properly talked about and proper education, talking about it is not going to make someone gay. I grew up in a heteronormative society, 2 straight parents, a straight brother, and I'm gay. It didn't work. It didn't rub off on me. So talking about this stuff is not going to make a kid change or be whatever. If anything, talking about it will actually make your child happier and healthier, more confident, feel less isolated, and just work better at school, actually be in a much better environment for themselves. What I would also say is that because gender and sex are 2 very different things, when you're talking about gender in a classroom, you're not talking about sex. It's not the sex conversation, which I know a lot of American schools particularly parents are concerned about, this sort of sex education. Gender's not to do with sex, and actually it's about how people express themselves. And if you look at history with the Hijra in India and in the Kama Sutra, there's mentions of 3rd gender, the 2-spirit people, or 2-spirit, I should say, of Native American people. These people have always existed. It's always there. It's part of society and culture and how we express ourselves as people. It's not to do with sex. That's another whole different conversation. So I think for me, a lot of what I do is about actually educating people so that they actually really understand what their fears are, like the actual language, so that they realize that there isn't potentially actually a fear, because what they think is happening actually isn't happening. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. And yes, April.
I think it's a very similar conversation, Cath, that I would have about how brains work differently with students in school too, that this is not something to hide and cover up and try to, but this is so difficult for students, especially when we're talking this 10 to 14-year-old age frame when everybody's trying to figure themselves out. And it also has to do with, how is that person doing that math problem differently than I am? And actually, I don't get it. And I'm afraid to say, and I don't want to talk about it. But again, it's the same idea that we have to be able to talk about all of these things. We have to have teachers in the class that are comfortable talking about our differences, and that's the best part about us. And highlighting the fact that we are better by talking about these things. And one of the important things to acknowledge is that out of the world's population, we know that about 15% of the population has some type of disability. So if you think about it that way, we all sit in a classroom with somebody that is somewhere on that spectrum of a learning difference. And then we all kind of fit in somewhere in there, depending on what it is we're working on. So having those open conversations about how we are different and the same is really vital.
And something like that just springs to mind, something I heard a couple of weeks ago. Someone was talking about how when you get much older and you then require care, you become disabled. So actually, whilst you're living your life, you're actually only temporarily abled, which I thought was a really nice, clever shift on that. And actually just my whole body was like, it just made me really think about it a bit differently from that point of view.
It could happen anytime, where one car ride or one bike ride or one airplane, a ride away from something happening to our body and it not functioning the way that we were used to it functioning. So this is, it's a bit like when COVID started and most of Europe was like, oh, it's in China, it'll stay there. It was just, this blinder that it was not going to arrive in the rest of the world. That's, you never know. And it's okay that you don't know.
And on that point, I would say for allies with LGBTQ plus community, that exactly that, you never know who you're talking to, or who needs to hear you be inclusive. So I've often been places where I've spoken up and said something. I've been in a meeting room or even at school, and I've spoken up and questioned some homophobia, or I've said, well, actually, no, that's not true, and corrected someone. And people won't do it in the space, but invariably people come up to me afterwards and say, thank you, my sister's gay. I'm really pleased you said that. Thanks for standing up, or for this or for that. And if you're thinking about a kid who's realized that they're part of the community and they need to out themselves, you can be sure that they will be hyper observing who is safe and who is not. So Uncle Dave, who might have sat on the sofa for years shouting homophobic stuff at TV programs or whatever on the radio or whatever, you can bet your bottom dollar that that kid is not going to come out to that person. So if you want to be an ally, it's about creating a safe space so that someone can actually come and talk to you and be that person that to share and to share when they're ready. Not everyone's ready always at the same time. So
yeah, I completely agree. I mean, but it's also the point where we were sitting with some a couple of weeks ago and having a drink, and he said, so one of the man said he was just acting like a spaz, right? And it was immediately my role to tell him that what that really means and why we shouldn't use it. But you have to follow, walk that line of not being shaming, but
very difficult sometimes.
Giving ownership and teaching in the moment. And so he took it very well and said, I didn't realize, thank you for letting me know. But you don't always get that reaction.
No. And that's why it's really important for people who aren't part of the LGBTQ plus community to speak out, because like you say, it's my responsibility every single time. I can't ignore it. I have to speak up. So,
but that's exhausting for you, right? And that's why you need allies.
Exactly. And so for allies, being a better ally is about speaking up every single time, not just when it's comfortable to do so. Yeah. Actually imagine what it's like speaking up, being that person, so that people expect me to have a voice and to want to defend and call out this kind of bigotry. They don't expect the cisgender heterosexual person as much. And when people, like kids at school, if they're bullies, or people who are bullies as adults, they will often say something because there's an assumption that the rest of the people in the room actually think the same as they do. And if someone says something and questions it, it suddenly shifts it entirely. And we haven't got long, so I won't give you examples, but it makes a difference. If one person says something, it then shifts the dynamic, and people start to realize that we're all amongst you. We're meant to be 10% of the world population. So all these countries that say they haven't got gay people, that's what I say.
I'm just sitting here and smiling. I'm trying to contribute, and I wanted to talk about the topic of that we all are disabled sometimes when you have an accident or when people with uterus are pregnant and you have a stroller and you need an elevator. I mean, it's so many things. And the thing is that I wanted to add to that is we have to realize that if we are inclusive, we make life better for everyone. It is nice to have captions in online formats. It's nice to be able to see everything on the screen. It's like little differences that make such a huge impact. So sometimes people confuse this extra portion or the extra something just for a certain marginalized group, but actually it is equity. So everybody can have access in the end, and then we all can thrive. And I try to be inclusive and just read the comment by Meg here. You're right, changing our mental map, for example, pronouns and use of they is not hard. I switched to using she as the generic pronoun, referring to animals, doctors, police, various occupations in my classroom, and with my family, children, to try push that mindset that females can be in all spaces. I now work to intentionally use they. It's not that hard. And I'm an English major. Thank you so much, Meg. And there are many things that we can do to be inclusive. And sometimes people really struggle with this little changes that they can do. But this is because many people are privileged and they have a lack of data. So as a member of the LGBTQI community, I experience a lot of discrimination because I'm Black. I experience a lot of microaggressions in my day-to-day life. And if you're white, if you're heterosexual, if you're very privileged, you do not experience these microaggressions. So you don't have this data set that I have. And then it's very hard for people to understand why there is a need to make equitable measures so that everybody can thrive. And we're almost running out of time, but maybe for the last minute, and we've talked already about allyship. So if there are teachers out there, if there are parents out there, what can they do? What can they address at their school? What would you recommend? What they can do, how to show solidarity or keep the needle moving towards more equity?
I would start with talking about universal design. And that's what you were referring to, Ellen. In schools, we talk about universal design for learning, but universal design in general, one of my inclusion heroes is Shelley Moore, and she talks about a professional bowler in terms of when you are thinking about your class as the pins, laid up out in that triangle. Professional bowler never goes right down the middle, never shoots for the middle. They always go for the outside pins. And when you go for the outside pins, you get them all. And this is the idea of what needs to happen in the classroom in terms of working with students with different brains and different functions and strengths and weaknesses. If you reach for those outside pins, you will serve everyone in the classroom. So thinking about your work and your lesson design universally and how you can accommodate for all of the brains in your room without changing the way you teach by doing a 180. That's not what we're asking for. It's just those small tweaks that are going to make a mountain of difference.
Yeah, I would agree exactly the same for my type of inclusion. If you're a parent, it's things like asking your school whether there's any LGBTQ plus inclusion policies, or if there's an inclusion policy, what does it actually say? A lot of them are very, very generic and don't have any real details of what that actually means. In the classroom, it's things like you could get the kids to introduce themselves rather than you referring to them, if there's an opportunity to do that. It's if you're splitting the class for class activities, give the children numbers, don't give them boys over there, girls over there, because non-binary kids, that's very, very uncomfortable. It's also about being a welcoming space so that even in the application process, can families see themselves in that, or are there any options to have a mother and father? I know there's an awful lot of international school websites that I've seen that when you click mother, it automatically makes your gender female. There's often not spaces, so it's like have parent 1, parent 2. Don't make any assumptions in those kind of forms. There's other things like in the classroom, this bog standard thing is just calling out homophobia instantly if it's mentioned in the classroom. It's about having gender neutral bathrooms in the school, so those kids don't always have to make a choice and feel uncomfortable. There's so many things. There's kind of too many to list here, but it's all about making little changes that actually make everybody welcome. And the last thing I wanted to say was a lot of, because of cultures and religions, people are often afraid to put that they're a LGBTQ plus friendly school or talk about this stuff because they worry about that they will end up turning away, putting off some other types of families. What I would say to you is that as a school, you need to decide what your actual stance is and what you're going to what your values are, because an inclusion label or something that shows that you're inclusive is not just for my community, it's for all the other parents, the heterosexual cisgendered parents who want their children to grow up in an inclusive environment as well. And often the people who need to see this stuff will be the ones that see it. The ones that have a problem with it might not actually necessarily notice it. So I go, if there's two cafes, one's got a rainbow sticker, I go into the one that's got a rainbow sticker. I don't go into the other one. I know that this one is a safe space for me. It's little things like that. You see on Google, there's pubs in London. Yeah, exactly. Pubs in London have LGBTQ plus friendly. They also on Google, it'll also say trans safe space. It's things like that. It's getting this on a sticker and whacking it on your desk in your classroom or on your laptop computer or on your letterbox or like wherever. It's just the people who need to see it will see it.
I love that. And all of you out there, you can drop your feedback. And because we have come to the end of the conversation room,
So
I'm a little bit upset. I didn't have much to say, but I knew that up front, which is really great. And thank you, Cath, and thank you, April, so much for this conversation. If people out there would like to reach out, what is the best way and what can you offer to them? Maybe just one more time in a nutshell.
Yeah, if people go onto my website, the drawntoastory.com, they can sign up to my mailing list, which will have information about running some courses later in the year, be kept up to date about that. I'm also offering any international schools a free LGBTQ plus inclusion essentials assessment of their websites, just a base assessment to see how inclusive you are. So if you want to do that, let me know. You can sign up for all of that kind of stuff on the mailing list at drawntoastory.com. So,
and anyone can reach out to me on remfreyeducationalconsulting.com or any of those handles that you see there on LinkedIn and Instagram or Twitter. I love having the conversation. As you can tell, Cath and I are talkers. So anytime you want to reach out, happy to talk and brainstorm solutions. That's what we're going for, is finding those solutions.
Yeah. Oh, and can I just actually say, every single Tuesday, if you want a bit more information, every single Tuesday I do a thing called Talkback Tuesday, which is 60 seconds of LGBTQ plus chat. And I put it on Instagram and Facebook, which is at Drawn to a Story. And it's just snippets of information, questions that people have asked me answering questions, and there's an anonymous link if you would like to ask a question anonymously, which is also fine. Any question is on the table.
I love that. And if there are organizations watching this, you can book us, okay? The whole package. And we have a huge network of advocates and activists who can also support you. So please reach out if you need any resources. If you want to give us more detailed feedback on this conversation room, you know where to find us. And this is it. It's a wrap. Thank you, Annette in the back, for yielding the comments here and getting the technical all right and in shape. Thank you again, Cath. Thank you again, April, and a shout out to Sarah, who brought us all together. And thank you for you out there engaging with us here through the chat and watching this conversation room. I think, okay, now I have to think, when is the next conversation room? I think it's going to be in September. They're going to be two. One is about critical masculinity. Oh, yes. Unfortunately, in German, not in English. We have to do another one in English. And we have another one, and I always have trouble to pronounce it correctly. It's about white adjacency. It's with two people with Asian background, and we're going to talk about racism and the nuances and colorism. It's going to be awesome. So watch out for the next conversation rooms. It's going to be brilliant. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, everyone out there. And take good care, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.